Yeah, my name is Kelly Patterson, and I'm in the Department of Political Science. And together, Chris and I teach American Heritage, which means sections from 250 to 800 students, depending on which section it is. The one thing, Chris and I are going to split this up since we do so much coordination with regard to American Heritage together. And what I know about teaching large classes, Chris has taught me. But the first is, what I urge everybody to always do is that as they're thinking about teaching a large section, is always think of scale. Always be mindful of scale. What you think you can do in a small class is always much more difficult in a larger class. Mistakes are harder to correct because of the transaction costs of disseminating information. The types of assignments you can have and how you administer those assignments are always more difficult because of scale. Oftentimes, the university infrastructure that is there to support you with regard to many of your medium and smaller size classes has no comprehension of what a large class is. The year before Chris and I started teaching American Heritage together, we came up with the brilliant idea of wanting to put quizzes online for Learning Suite, and we told Learning Suite that we had a lot of students and it was a large class, and they said, oh yeah, no, we can handle a large class. We said, it's a really large class, and they said, we can handle a really large class. And then the first week we had quizzes, it crashed Learning Suite. And then the person at Learning Suite said, we will individually go in and correct all the mistakes that were made, and just have your students email or call us. And then about 3 or 4 days into that exercise, they called us and said, you have a really large class. But once again, always think of scale, so that whenever you make a mistake or whenever you have a problem, you get, almost by a magnitude of how much larger the class is, that many more emails and that many more confused students. And so always take that into consideration. In large classes, we cannot always assume that everybody has even read the syllabus. We try to have students read the syllabus and email us something about themselves when they get to the end of the syllabus to tell us that they've read the syllabus. Even with that, I only get about 60%, 65% of the students who do that. So it's very easy to still get questions mid-semester about what the assignments are and when they're due. Detailed syllabi are not bad with large classes, but in our experience, we should also realize the variety of students we have in class, and that a syllabus cannot account for every contingency. So don't make your syllabus so law-like that every contingency has to be accounted for in your syllabus. You can still be an individual professor as you think about the large class, but try not to reflect, once again, every contingency in your own syllabus. Your students may not end up reading it and understanding it and remembering it anyway. And at that point, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Kelly. So my name is Chris Karpowitz. I'm from the Political Science Department, and as Kelly indicated, we teach American Heritage, and we coordinate in how we do that. So as Kelly indicated, we have sections that range from 250 to 800. We each teach 3 of those sections in a semester, and so together we have something like 3,000 students, or a little under 3,000 students. And so, that's a scale that is daunting, really daunting at times, and I think it makes it even harder to do some things organizationally than are possible even in classes of 100, 150, or 200. So Kelly talked a little bit about organization, and As we split this up, we thought I might say something about presentation and what it means to present to a large class like that. And I guess the first thing that both of us thought about is that there's nothing wrong with an engaging and maybe even entertaining presentation style, as long as that entertainment is directed to a purpose. It's often possible, and we find it sort of one of the core pedagogical challenges of teaching American heritage is to think about complex concepts and how can we make them relatable for a large audience of mostly freshmen. And so that, Kelly said he had learned some things from me in teaching, but much of what I've learned is from Kelly, because it's been very helpful for me to have our meetings together in which we talk about each lecture, and we really kind of push each other about what is the core thing that we want to communicate, right? What's the core set of principles or ideas, and what's superfluous, and what can be left out, or covered in a different way, or with a different sort of activity. So what is it that we want to do with that lecture hour? And how can we express it? Can we go beyond just creating a bullet point on a PowerPoint slide about it? Is there a figure or a picture or a video or an exercise that we could do together? And we think really hard about that, and sometimes we do silly things. So when we teach about Aristotle and the idea of telos, we actually have the BYU cheerleaders come to class, and we try to do a cheerleading routine with them. And that's silly, and the students take embarrassing pictures of us, but there's a larger purpose, because it leads to a discussion of whether we've actually captured the essence of cheerleading in our very difficult and embarrassing attempts to do what the BYU cheerleaders are doing. And so it allows us, so they've had a reading on Aristotle and the idea of telos, and then we can follow up with this activity in class that leads to a discussion in class, and maybe additional discussion about deeper elements of that in their discussion sections.
Yeah, they can tell from our body types and talents that we were not designed to be cheerleaders.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting to have this discussion of what the essence of this activity is and whether we could ever sort of fulfill that essence. So I think it's important to have fun with the class. A sense of humor matters. It can help engage the classroom. But in doing silly things with cheerleaders, for example, we're not trying to be frivolous just for the sake of it. There's a larger point that we're trying to help communicate. I think in a large class, it's also important to think about different ways of engaging students and student comments, to think hard about what comments you want to hear, what comments, what portions of the lecture are ripe for further discussion and comments in a larger lecture section. We've thought about lots of different ways of engaging students. Sometimes that's just by a roving mic and actually taking comments to open-ended questions. Sometimes we ask questions via iClicker or other technology that would allow us to do that. Sometimes some of our colleagues try to flip the classroom and have students talk with each other a little bit and then talk together in the larger group. And so I think for me, being very rigorous about what it is that we're trying to accomplish, thinking hard about what goes into that lecture hour. We do objective slides at the beginning where we tell students these are the things we're going to try to accomplish, and a summary slide at the end where we say these are the concepts we think we've talked about today, and try to sort of wrap it up with thoughts about the larger implications of those concepts. And then finally, and I'll stop here, I think teaching a large section like American Heritage requires not only organization on the back end, but lots of thought about classroom management. We, for example, don't allow laptops unless they have a an accommodation for that, because we found that students are just a lot more cued into what we're doing if they don't have solitaire and other distractions in front of them. Jeremy Pope has a great story of watching his dad lecture in American Heritage while the person next to him was playing an online shooting game, and it's pretty funny. But we've been trying to think about how to manage that, and happy to talk more about what we've decided to do and the accommodations we try to allow as well. So I'll stop there.
Well, I'm Arden Pope. I teach Econ 110. These sections run from about 230 students to as high as about 700 students. Most of my classes have been between about 250 and 300 students. And it's interesting for me to come and learn from the professionals. The only thing that makes me a professional is they do send me a salary. I get a salary. I don't. I've been struggling with trying to figure out how to teach large classes ever since I started doing it. I learned one thing when I first started, and actually it was sort of by accident. We had a faculty member get ill. I volunteered to take over the class. I thought teaching a large class would be a lot different than teaching the 30, 35 students I was used to. So I tried to teach it different, more of a lecture style, and I was a complete failure. It wasn't until I went back and started teaching like it was 35 students that it started to work at least better for me. So I still teach a class of 300 students in a lot of ways just like I teach a class that's only 30 or 35. The points that have been made here, though, about scale are incredibly important. There is that issue. So I have just a few points to make. One is, in a large class, being organized is absolutely critical. The scale makes it such that it's just so hard to go by the seat of your pants. You have to be really well organized, and that's why it's important for some continuity. As much as it may not seem, well, basically you need to be teaching the class multiple times or you won't be able to figure it out. The other issue, and this is true at small classes or big classes, if you're going to do a good job, you have to know the material. And this is, I think, even more important with the freshman level classes than any of them. You really must know the material. There's just no excuse for you going into there without having it down. You'll make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, and you have to be willing to accept those. But if you know the material, if you know it well, you'll make fewer mistakes and you'll confuse your students less, and it's better all the way around. The other is you need to be well prepared going into each of the classes. Again, the scale makes it such that, well, that's important for every class. You've got to go and be well prepared. The other thing I think in these big classes you have to do is have to have relatively high energy. That's getting harder the older I get. It's not like you have to be with cheerleaders, although that sounds like a fun idea. But you can't be monotone. You have to be willing to mix it up. You have to change things around, and you have to be willing to engage in sort of a high energy way in a large class. It does seem like the larger the class is, the more they can sap it from you if you don't go in there prepared to just be high energy. A lot of that is simply, again, I mentioned mixing it up, doing something different. Large classes hate PowerPoint, class after class after class after class. I mean, am I right? I mean, and I think that our students are hating PowerPoints more and more and more every year. We've got to figure out better ways to do it than have our PowerPoint slides and drone on. The other issue, then I have two other points that are kind of related to each other, and that is have an illusion of spontaneity and an illusion of intimacy. Now, the illusion of spontaneity has to be mostly an illusion, because if you really are just trying to be spontaneous in a big class, it gets out of hand. But one of the real good things about a large class is it's almost, I'll call it the central limit theorem of large classes. You can ask a question and you can guarantee you know pretty much what the dumb answers will be. and the smart one. So you can start to use specific questions that you know generate specific responses, respond to them as if it was spontaneous, and the students really do appreciate that. I have a series of lectures I do where I ask questions, and the students, as far as they can tell, they're the ones that are driving the lecture. It's just me picking the answers that I want. And in large classes, you have a lot of confidence that you can do that and have this illusion of spontaneity. And I found that to be one of my most sort of successful efforts, is having these students think, this class, they don't know that I'm telling exactly the same jokes to the same responses. They think that this was spontaneous. And there is this sort of, if you can get them going, that was cool, I'm part of the group. This is the only class like this, you've gone a long ways. The other one has to do with this illusion of intimacy. I suppose in smaller classes you really can get to know your students well and have somewhat of a relationship with them. For me, after about 25, 30 students, I lose that desire. And so I want it to be an illusion. A class of 300 students, I don't want to know them. But I don't want them to know that. I try very, very hard to let them think that I care about all of them. There's this sort of illusion of intimacy, and try to treat them all well. And as part of the class, there ends up being lots of nicknames. There's always a Sophie in my class. There's always a Jughead in my class. There's always that limited guy in my class. Occasionally they take offense, but not very often. Mostly they enjoy the intimacy, if you will, even though when the class is over, we've erased the chalkboard, I sneak out and go to my office. I know that. So be organized, know the material well, be prepared, be high energy, have an illusion of spontaneity and intimacy. That's about all I know.
Okay, I'll go next. Sorry, I have no voice, so here we go. I'm Haley Pierce, and I teach in the sociology department. It's my first year here, so I'm definitely a pro. But I taught intro sociology when I was an adjunct, when I was graduating, and then I was doing my master's program here. So I've done it about a dozen times in the intro class, and it's about 200 students, just shy of that. I thought of 3 things that I can attribute some of the success in my classroom to. The first was mentioned, was switching up your methods, but not too much, right? I show the occasional documentary. I, in one lecture, actually yell is not probably the right word, but I get really mad at my class, all in a simulation to express a lot of the terms that I'm then going to describe. And the audible sigh in the class when I tell them I'm joking is always entertaining for me. I did a first attempt at a board game, so there was 36 teams of 5 playing a board game in my class, and it went really well. So that worked well. But then I also get comments like, I don't want to stand up in class anymore, and can't you condense lectures so we get out early every time? So you can switch it up, but not everyone will be happy. The second is to show vulnerability, but not too much vulnerability. Thanks to Dr. Jane Lopez, gave me this great idea that she does as well. We start our very first lecture in this intro class teaching about identity and how some identities are visible and we tell people about them, and there are things that we enjoy, but there's a lot of them that are also hidden and things that are really important to us, but we don't talk about them. So I open up one of my invisible identities to them on the very first day of class. Then I ask them to anonymously write down one of theirs. I brought my list from last semester. This is just a few of them. Anxiety and depression are the highest by far. Let's see, single, biracial, bisexual, diabetic, mental illness, Hispanic, spina bifida, shy, introverted, early return missionary, only child, liberal, epilepsy, right? So the list goes on, and I read it to them the next class period. And it's silent in class when I read it. And it leads to a really good discussion about who is in the classroom, who we're talking to, why we should be kind of aware of how we frame our responses to questions and things. But when you show that vulnerability and when you express your testimony and all these things, you open yourself up to a kind of new realm of comments from students, such as, I don't know why she thinks she's smarter than the other students. That's always a good one. Because I'm not a student, right? So I think it leads them to kind of question your authority a little bit to some degree, but I think it earns more respect than it causes those comments. And then the third one, I say kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I think it's my biggest success and my biggest downfall is to be a woman, but not too much of a woman. In terms of success, I have countless female students and male students come into my office saying it's so helpful to see a young mother with a career, and that's Mormon, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? And so it's crucial, and I think it's so helpful, and I get a lot of respect and a lot of that energy and a lot of involvement from that. But I also think that's my biggest battle that I face in teaching sociology, which is a highly sensitive topic. I get comments about my clothes and my appearance and my age and my testimony of the proclamation and my validity as a mother because of this. And so I get a lot of success from my students and a lot of kind of emotional response and a lot of respect, but I also get a lot of pushback. So I think, it's all about figuring out this balance because you can't please everyone. That's what I'm learning. That's my biggest lesson so far. I can do everything I can to make it the best class, but someone will hate it. And they will be vocal about it in a rude way. But you still try, right? You still do your very best. And so that's so far.
I think I'll use some of my thoughts to tie some of the themes together you're hearing. For me, the first one is fill the room. Not with students, but again, with energy. I think the worst thing that can happen in large sections is, and sorry, by the way, Larry Nelson teaches child development from 200 to 400 students. And so the worst thing that can happen is be swallowed by the room. And so use everything at your disposal to fill the room. Your own energy, movement, your voice. I used to think that not using a microphone was, somehow proving something, whereas now that microphone allows me to do things with my voice and range of how I use my voice, passion for the subject, whatever you do to bring the content to life, just don't get swallowed by the room. How do you do that? Play to your strengths. You've heard a lot of suggestions of practices, but I would caution, don't try to be anybody else. Play to your strengths, whatever it is that you're good at. If use of media, interesting examples, trying to flip the classroom, break the classroom down into smaller groups, or for me, it's the use of critical thinking exercises, hard questions, and good examples. Whatever it is, play to your strengths and how you're going to fill the room. And then remember why you're trying to fill the room. I've heard some faculty over the years say that it's their responsibility to teach information rather than to entertain. And I just think that view is naive. Our job is to help students learn. That's our job. And so our attempts to fill a room, as it were, is our doing our part to help with that. There's a theory in child development, cognitive development, learning, that talks about the first step in the learning process is they have to pay attention. If they don't pay attention, the information can't even get in. I show a video clip, 2-minute clip of an odd part of the movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Where things are floating around in the water. And through the whole thing, I'm talking to him, I'm making announcements, and then 5 minutes later, I ask him to write down everything that they saw floating by in the water. They can't do it. it's only been 5-10 minutes, but because I was so distracting to them, it hadn't even got in. I feel what we're doing to fill a room is our contractual relationship, or our relationship with them, that we're going to do our part to help them pay attention. And so with that, in trying to fill a room, we need to check our egos at the door. With 380 students in my class right now, at any given time, somebody is sleeping, somebody is talking, somebody's on a laptop, somebody's leaving the room. And if I'm concerned that what they're talking about is me, or that they're leaving is because I offended, or they're sleeping because I'm boring, I can't fill a room. I can't fill a room if I don't check my ego at the door. And that frees me up. I don't have to do, so I'm not, everybody has, you got to do your own style. I don't have to make policies about laptop use or anything else. I actually take this as a personal challenge that I've got to be more interesting than anything they can find on their laptop. And that's just a personal challenge that, and so when I've got their eyeballs, I know I'm doing something right. And if I don't, it's on me. It's on me. And then the last thing I would say that I'm not sure hasn't been mentioned, but I think we need to know in these large sections that is indeed the illusion of intimacy is all that we're giving. I don't know them each one by one, but all of us know that somebody does. I'll get comments from students that I can't tell you how much it meant to learn this in your class, and they'll tell me what they remember me saying, and I didn't say it. I didn't say it, but what they needed to hear is what they heard because somebody else does know them very intimately, and I hope we'll remember that when we're in our large sections as well. So, all right, we've got about 15 minutes opened up for question. If you have for the panel generally or a specific person, yeah.
I'm wondering how you keep the material fresh and keep that like passion or excitement when you're teaching 3 sections of the same class in a semester, or when you're teaching it for the 12th time. How, obviously it's new for your students, but how do you not get sick of what you're doing or feel like your joke is old?
You can't. Three times a semester for 12 years is too much. Your department chair should change that up. That's too much. For me, I only teach once a semester typically. I teach another class, but I only teach the large class once a semester. And I can do that. That's about right. I've taught it twice a semester a few times, and I've found that to be a bit more challenging. I can't imagine. I've never done it, but 3 times a semester, multiple semesters in a row, I think you need to talk with your chair. That seems a bit much.
So in American Heritage, I guess I would say 2 things. 3 things. We are on a schedule in our department where we're 2 years on, 2 years off. And the 2 years on means you do it 1 semester in the year, right? And that's about right for me because I find I have to get back into the upper division classes that are closer to my research than this big interdisciplinary class is. It's just so enriching for me to have some small sections as well and to teach in the areas that are closest to my research. I have to have that, and I've been blessed to have good department chairs who have supported that and who have put us on a rotation that I think works. Because then we're off for 2 years, we can be doing our thing. It allows it to be fresher when we get back into it, and then to do it one more time to improve, right? And so I think there's some making it fresh just by being away from it and then coming back and finding new examples. But I would also say the days that we teach, maybe Kelly feels differently, it's hard to do 3 sections in a day. It's exhausting, and you know, by the 3rd time with the same joke, it is old for me, and I'm tired by the end.
The way Chris and I teach it, I'll do 3 sections right in a row, and then he'll do the next 3 sections right in a row. Other faculty do 2 sections, then take some time off, go wander around campus, bumping into buildings, and then come back and do the 3rd section. And so it's either way. The first section is always a little rugged. There's a couple of minor mistakes. Second section, always spot on.
Perfect.
It's like you got it. And then the 3rd section, you're starting to get a little tired, you know, and you're starting to sort of, you know, the energy flags a little bit. But what Arden said is right. You should talk to your chair, talk to the dean about this teaching schedule, if that is it. And then if you can't change it, then make sure that you bring your section along, or what you're teaching, along with your own intellectual journey. And you've created a framework for your class, but that doesn't mean that your class is perfect or that there aren't other wrinkles in the questions and research that's being done that couldn't allow you to just kind of like update and to go off maybe in another direction. Now, maybe for economics, it's not possible because utility maximization is utility maximization. You just like, I don't know how, like, but maybe, you know.
So you have to check your ego at the door.
See,
I'm not going to
so-
get after him.
But for people like Chris and me, there's always kind of new philosophical books out there, something like that, that we're going to read, and we're going to say, oh man, we're not thinking about this question quite the right way. So we'll change it. And that's what you should do too.
I think the thing that you heard there is talk to your chair, but then know yourself, because this is kind of foreign to me. I actually do teach 2 different classes of large sections. I teach the Eternal Family course, 300 students, Child Development, 300. I've done those large sections, usually 3 of those a semester, 19 years, haven't had a leave. And I would never want a semester away from it. And so my discussion with the chair would sound very different. It's just about support and resources to do it, TAs and whatnot. So those are the discussions. Because it's exciting. It's the first time I think of her example. I can only imagine what hearing that audible sigh is like. I know it's coming, and I get excited for those things. And because this is the first time those students have heard the joke or had the experience or been posed the question. And I fortunately haven't got tired of that yet. So
I want to jump in and say something too about, not directly related to this question, but just kind of large sections overall. If we're teaching large sections, we're mostly using similar or the same sorts of classrooms or sharing the same sorts of classrooms. So when I've been teaching American Heritage, I followed Arden for the last several years. He teaches that 8 a.m. section of Economics 110, and I've watched him over the years. Brings a tremendous amount of energy to the class, and the students love him. I mean, they love him. And what Arden does for me, which is really helpful, is he finishes on time. Okay, so Arden, when he's done, and then he gets out of my way so that I can get in and load up my PowerPoint, get my film clip going, and all these other things, so that then I have time to relax and watch students come in and sit down, as opposed to somebody who lets the class go over, and it's like 9:55 or 2 minutes before 10 o'clock, and the students are still talking, and you know they've got people up at the board, and you know, I think as a community of teachers who teach the large section, I'm blessed to be able to follow Arden, right? And so it's taught me to get out of the classroom too. When I'm done, I'm done. And I get my stuff out and I leave the classroom. And not every professor has been that way. It's a little, and it makes a difference for how anxious I am when I start.
some thoughts on TAs. So I imagine you've got a lot of them. How do you manage that? Help them be reliable with each other, etc.
So there's different philosophies, and I think this is good because there's sort of the approach American Heritage uses, which is quite different than what we use. And I'm not saying that I know which is best. I can tell you what I do with mine. I usually have about 5 TAs in a section. I bring them in, I visit with them. We have about a 1-hour meeting. And the first thing I tell them, I says, you're going to have a lot of responsibility, but you have all the authority too. And I'm sincere about that. We have incredibly amazing students. I'll ask them about themselves. 2 of them will be, 4 of the 5 will be returned missionaries. 2 of them have been assistant to the president, this sort of thing. These are kids that really are bright and capable. And so one of the first things I do is I say, look, I want to come into the class, I want to teach the class, and I want you to handle all of these other things. And I start out, I have a head TA to call the meetings and say, I'm not going to come to the meetings unless you invite me. You guys figure out all of these problems. I know it's a little different with some sections, but I actually give them a lot of responsibility. I have one is my student liaison person. So every student that emails me with a concern, I just forward it to this student and say, you fix it and you fix it within a day or 2. If you have to come talk to me, we do it. I have another one that isn't, I just divide up the responsibilities to them and I really give them the authority and the responsibility. And I've had a few exceptions, but I've been doing this for about 25 years. Of the hundreds of teaching assistants I've had, if I give them the responsibility and I've had them, you meet regularly and work it out, and if there's problems, come talk with me. But if you can't figure it out, you should. And it's amazing how good they do. Give them a lot of responsibility, give them the authority to do it. And I can tell you, probably only 1 in 100 I'll have problems with. The rest do great. Now, others are more structured than that. Isn't that right with American Heritage?
We're a little
more structured, but I'm not.
We give them a lot of responsibility as well, but we're more structured in part because we're pulling TAs from a variety of different majors, and so they are leading discussion sections once a week. So we only lecture twice a week, on Mondays and Wednesdays. On Thursdays and Fridays, our students meet with their TAs in a discussion section. We meet with the TAs once a week. We have about 40 to 45 TAs in a semester, so it's really like having another class. And the purpose of that 1-hour class a week is to teach them what we want them to do in the discussion sections.
Yeah, we write detailed lesson plans for them and then go over the lesson plans with them, making sure they understand what the material is and what the objective for the lab is, so that all students are getting pretty much the same.
What's your student to TA ratio?
Ours is about one teaching assistant per about 60 students.
Yes,
1 to
ours
60, 1
similar.
to 60, 1 to 70. We try to keep it around 70 or 80, don't we?
With managing TAs, so I find I spend a lot of time with students where there's like accommodations or and then like extensions on assignments and things like that, and where I wasn't necessarily comfortable with TAs handling it and doing it, but maybe I should be. And anyway, I'm just curious about how you handle things like that and how something I could hand off to a TA.
I hand off everything to the TA, and then in the end, here's the game. In my syllabus and things, I sound as cranky and mean as I can, right? Nothing late. But then throughout the semester, if they miss an exam, I'm actually really accommodating. But I tell them I won't promise what'll happen. And so if there's something happen, I missed this assignment or whatever, I'll say, write me an email, send it to me. If the TA can't handle it, send it to me, and I will sit on it. By the end of the semester, I'll know whether you're a conscientious student or whether you're a flaky student. I tell them exactly that. And I said, I will treat you fair. At the end of the and so you don't spend all semester fighting over all of these issues. At the end of the semester, 95% of them have solved themselves by the end of the semester. They've either dropped out of the class or they've demonstrated that they're a superb student and that was just a fluke or whatever it is. And I just treat every student well at the end of the semester, and it's easy. So I don't fight over anything during the semester. I wait till the end, and almost all of the problems have sort of resolved themselves by then anyway. Does that make sense?
I mean, so like, let's say somebody, they had anxiety attacks and they missed the midterm. Like, what?
I say, okay.
I guess I'm not totally. I don't see how that gets resolved at the end of the day.
I just say, oh, come over, I'll give it to you. I'll have one of my TAs administer it. I said, I don't know how I'm going to handle it. If you show that you're a conscientious student, and then I usually just give them the exam, give them that score. But about, of those that missed the midterm or one of the midterms, they've clearly flunked the class by the end of the semester anyway, right? So why fight over it? It's just not worth it. Or if they miss an assignment, but they do all of their other assignments, I just give it to them. But most of the students that are flaky on a midterm, they're flaky on the next midterm, and they're flaky on the final, and it just doesn't matter, right? They flunked the class. But if they're really good, if they are conscientious, I think it's sort of our obligation to treat them well. So even though the syllabus says that we won't, I still do anyway.
I had a question about flipping. A couple people mentioned flipping the classroom and just people's experiences with that. I'm particularly curious about assessment and accountability issues, there's always at the back of my mind this question about does it make the lecture, the coming to class superfluous? And then it leads me back to what are we doing in class and all these other questions about that sort of thing. So I'm just wondering what kinds of experiences you've had, how you've managed the flipping the classroom and what that looks like. I think assessment is probably the biggest question I have there. Sorry, that was a bundle of questions.
Does anybody on the panel flip theirs?
Some of our colleagues have spent some time thinking about that, but we haven't done a ton of it, to be honest. We try to be very creative, as we talked about earlier, in how we teach different concepts and try to get beyond just a PowerPoint recitation of things, right? And so we're thinking about examples. Sometimes we'll have the students talk to each other before we ask for their opinions, because we want them to kind of work through some issues. But Scott Bradford, I think, in American Heritage has done the most on that. He would be a good resource for that.
How much grading do you do and your TAs do?
I do not.
I do nothing. I tell my TAs right up front, I want to come in, I want to give the lecture. I want to stand up at the board and want you to come up and help me get people out. And then I say, I don't want to be bothered until the next lecture. I tell them that very clearly. And I say, you don't tell the students that. I will have your back, you have my back. Let's just, because, economists, we all agree, comparative advantage, right? These students are every bit as bright as I am, every one of these TAs. They're very capable. It doesn't make sense for me to do any grading, to be hassling with a lot of these things that the TAs could do really well. In big classes, use the TAs, trust the TAs. I can't emphasize that enough. That's really important.
One of the things, though, along these lines, I tell my students that I'm not trying to be standoffish with this policy, but I do require that if they have concerns about how a paper was graded, that they have to go to the TA who graded it. And we have that information available. And then once they've done that, because I think it's good both for the TAs and the students to go through that exercise, then if they come to me, I will regrade their paper, and whatever grade I give it stands, for better or for worse. And I make it clear to them I'm not doing that to be standoffish, that I don't want them there. If they want to come to me during my office hours and just say, how do I improve, they can come directly to me. But I don't want to get in the arguing of points. So I do have that kind of line of defense with the TAs. But I end up grading few. I'll grade any that are too sensitive, given the topic that I teach. They prefer that I grade it. And I always let my TAs know that if they're just dealing with a paper that's either hard for them to grade or read or topic or just style, I'll take those too. So I end up grading some.
I generally have the TAs do all the grading. I just go through and read, because I have them do response essays every chapter. So it gets them usually doing an activity or asking questions of people. And so I like to go see what they're doing. So I'll go read some of them and then put quotes from them up on the board in the next lecture and we discuss. So I don't grade them, but I do look at them.
And along with that, maybe something Alex asked as well. My head TA, goes through and does checks. We have reliability checks in our training meetings and then quality control checks as well. So that's one of the assignments of a head TA or somebody he or she appoints.
All right, I think our time's about up, so let's give our panel a round of applause. Thanks so much for joining us.